Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to have you with us today while we do this webinar on practicing law and parenting during the pandemic. We're going to do a little bit of a different method today. Instead of having each of our panelists speak to you and then open it up for questions, we want to have a more open dialogue regarding the issues that we are experiencing during the pandemic while we're trying to parent and the stresses involved in all of these colliding aspects of our lives. So I am happy to have our panelists with us today, Christina Jepson from Parsons Behle and Doug Fadel from Fadel Law, who are parents and practitioners, and they will be able to engage in this dialogue with us. So in order to make this much more interactive, I would like you to use the Q&A feature. And if you have any questions, please ask them at any time and we'll get those going. Don't use the chat feature. Please use the Q&A feature, and we can see if we can get everyone's questions answered and make this a really interesting, dynamic dialogue regarding practicing law while parenting during a pandemic. So to begin with, Christina and Doug are each going to take a few minutes and introduce themselves and explain a little bit about what they do and what their present working arrangement is, and then we'll move into some questions. Christina, would you like to start?
Sure. So I practice law at Parsons, Behle, and Latimer. I've been there for 25 years, and I do employment law. Any of you that do employment law know that that's been extra busy during the pandemic. So I've been being extra busy at work while also trying to parent in the pandemic. I have 2 daughters and 2 stepdaughters. When the pandemic hit in March, we had a senior in high school, a 10-year-old in 5th grade, and 2 kids off at college. And one child who was in Philadelphia in college, we had to get her home just sort of suddenly, and planes weren't flying, or people weren't really taking flights. My husband took off to go get her in Philadelphia and bring her back. I was at home with the rest of the 3 kids, trying to figure out schooling at home and me working at home. And then when he finally got her home, it's been all 6 of us in the house. 6 of us with Zoom going all the time and seeing if the internet will hold up. And that's been pretty crazy. And, all the things I'm sure you're all working on in terms of trying to figure out how you parent, how you run a law practice. Usually my husband's right behind me. We have a very small office. We're sort of back to back in here. I've done Zoom calls in my closet, in my bedroom, wherever I can find space. Sometimes I walk around the block and take client calls. So it's been pretty crazy. So that's what I've been doing. In terms of the office, our office, I guess, is officially open. I mean, it was always open in the sense that if you wanted to go in, you could. A few people go in. Most people don't go in, I would say. We have pretty strict COVID rules. I go in very rarely. I went in yesterday because I had a deposition and it's quieter in the office than it is at home now. And so I go in occasionally, but mostly I don't. My youngest, who's now in 6th grade, has 1 week on school and 1 week home remote school. So when she's in person at school, I have a little more ability to go into the office if I need to. When she's at home, like she is this week, it's a lot more difficult. So that's kind of the short story of what I'm doing right now.
So I'm Doug Fadel. I have my own estate planning firm in Bountiful. We're a small firm. At the time that COVID hit, we had 3 attorneys. Now we have 2 attorneys, and we have 4 support staff as well. The week that they closed down the kids' school, I found out that I had COVID. I started getting a headache, and I was starting to lose my voice. And I teach a class at the University of Utah, and the class was going to go online. So right before I started having symptoms, I went up to the university and I taught 2 classes in a row to an empty classroom, turned on the camera and taught a PowerPoint presentation to an empty classroom for 3 hours. And I started losing my voice. And so when I started to get symptoms, I just had a headache and I was losing my voice, and I just thought it was from talking too much. And I really didn't think anything of it because the symptoms they were describing were loss of breath, a cough, a fever, and I had none of those things. But I went to be tested anyway. When it came back positive, then we closed down our office. I went home, and I'm a single parent. I have 3 kids, a 9-year-old and then twins that are 7. And I locked myself in one room. I put them on the opposite side of the house. We talked through a door, tried to stay away from them as much as I could. And I was fortunate, my 9-year-old really rallied, and she made food for the kids 3 meals a day, took care of the twins. And I was surprised because she made pancakes, she made waffles, she made eggs. She had never done any of those things before, so she really rose to the occasion. And then I was out of quarantine fairly early because my symptoms were so mild. But then my kids were 14 more days in quarantine, so they were homeschooled anyway, but they were in quarantine. We couldn't go anywhere. We just had to stay at home. After they were out of quarantine, then we reopened my office again, and we've been trying to do our best with meeting with clients. In my office, we're able to be in separate offices. We can have our doors closed. And we've done some creative things in meeting with clients. We do Zoom, we do telephone conferences. I've met with clients in my parking lot. I've met with clients on their back patios. I met with one client in her garage. We're doing whatever we need to accommodate client needs. And in estate planning, sometimes your clients are a little older, have more health concerns. And so we're trying our best to social distance and wear masks and try to run the practice. More recently, my kids were around somebody who had COVID. They didn't catch it themselves, but as a result of that, they had another 14 days of quarantine where they had to stay home from school. And so I had to arrange for a niece of mine to stay home with them. Now they're out of that quarantine again, but it's a roller coaster ride between trying to practice law, try to parent, try to deal with schoolwork. The one thing that I think I am doing well, I'm successful at, is my kids are happy and they play well together and they like each other. And so I can't say that we are succeeding in at-home schooling. We're trying our best. Our practice is going fine. That's not an issue. But the one thing I am very proud about is my kids like each other and they're playing well together. And right now they're in a good mental space. They really do prefer going to school to staying home. But I'm at least happy with how positive their outlook is at the moment.
Great, thank you. As you can tell, I'm talking to a kid while you guys are talking because they don't go away. And I noticed last spring when we went completely online and I was teaching my class remotely, I had to shut myself in an office because 2 kids doing school, my grandkids live with us, they're both doing school, and 2 dogs that bark all the time can be fairly disruptive. So it has really caused us all to have to adjust and adapt. There is one question from an attendee that says, several studies show that working mothers, particularly those who are mothers of color, have been hit disproportionately hard by COVID, even calling what is happening a she-cession instead of a recession. Christina, what advice do you give to mothers so that we don't lose what gains we've made in this field? And Douglas, what are you doing to help mitigate the impact?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because most of us in the legal profession are very privileged. Just beginning with the concept that I can work at home. I don't work in a factory. I don't work in a retail establishment. I don't work somewhere where I have to go in like many people do. So they have either lost their jobs or they're being forced to go into work and deal with the risks of COVID. And also they can't be home with their kids in the way that I can. So even though there are a lot of struggles with being at home with kids and trying to do a law practice, it is still a very privileged position. So I think we have to recognize that many of our sisters and brothers are in much more difficult situations than ours. And we need to be empathetic. And to really step back a little bit, we need to be dealing with this as a society. I think maybe we're limited today to sort of talk about what we can do as lawyers in our own practices. But at some point, this entire society has got to get a hold on, what do we want our society to be like? What do we want to do to accommodate parents, including mothers and women of color who are getting hit much harder. And I think if you're in a position with a company where you have any control or ability to set policies, you should be working really hard to make it as accommodating for your employees as you can. Now recognize that a lot of people are in difficult situations, maybe more difficult than you, and think about what you can do to help them and hear what they have to say about it.
And I would reiterate, I think that it does make it easier if you have the resources to hire help. I do have the luxury of coming to an office where I have my own office. I can close my door. I don't need to physically be around people. And other people don't have that luxury. Even in our own profession, some people don't have that luxury. So I would reiterate that.
So as we've been able to see recently, the infection rate right now is even higher than it was when we completely locked down society in the spring. We seem to know more now about how to treat it, how to avoid it, and how to mitigate it in some instances. But since it looks like we will be working from home for the foreseeable future, I would like to ask you if your work hours have changed in the past several months, and if it looks like those work hours will either increase or decrease, or what has happened with your work life since the pandemic started?
Yeah, I can start with that. As an employment lawyer, the first number of months were extremely crazy. Congress was passing a lot of new laws that impacted employment. So you had FFCRA with new COVID leave policies. There were a lot of regulations coming out. Employers were furloughing employees, and then there was a period when they were bringing them back. So it was just sort of crazy busy. It has been for quite a while. I was sort of working all day, spending the evening with my kids, and then, going back to the computer for a couple hours, until midnight, which I'm a person who needs sleep. That hasn't been easy at all. And I really, it still seems very busy, but I think now that we're sort of settling into this for the long haul, and we really don't know when it's going to end. We know it's not going to be a couple months like we thought it was going to be, that we really need to get a better handle on schedules and having more predictable schedules for ourselves and for our children. Kids need routines. They need to know what's going to happen. And I think we do too. I think, just being under stress all the time is not sustainable. So I'm trying harder to come up with some routines in the household. And I can just give you one example. So every week, I just kind of look at what's on the schedule for the week for me and for my kids, and I put it on a piece of paper on the fridge, and we all discuss it. So everyone knows what's going on. So like on Wednesday, mom's gone for a couple hours because I've got a meeting where I really need to leave the house, and everyone's on their own, or dad's going to be in charge during that time, and you've got piano lesson on this day and you've got to get to it. So that's one thing I'm trying to do, is just, really settle into this and have better routines.
I've been trying to get my schedule in order and be proactive, but what I've learned is that I don't have control. And I just have to adapt to whatever's happening. When my kids first started back to school, Davis County was doing a Monday, Wednesday schedule for half the kids, Tuesday, Thursday for the other half of the kids. So I was being proactive, and my kids were to go Monday, Wednesday. So I was blocking out either a Tuesday or a Thursday that I would be home all day with them, and that would be our massive study day. Well, the first adjustment I had to make is there weren't enough kids in the Tuesday, Thursday group. So I agreed to move my kids to Tuesday, Thursday, but then my Mondays and Wednesdays were already full, so I couldn't have my day off. Eventually, I was able to do that. And then they changed the schedule again, and now there's 4 days in class. And then they were exposed to someone with COVID, and so they're all home, and they're back at home again. So I have to try and get somebody to be there all day long. And all of this is happening at the same time as the state planning industry is very busy right now, because when people have time, They think about things like their own mortality. And when there's a pandemic, they think about their own mortality. And so they want to make sure that everything's in order, and things they've been putting off, now there's an urgency to it. So my days often look like arrive at work at 5 a.m. I have my niece come to my house at 5. She sleeps on the couch until the kids wake up. I go back home. I help the kids with reading and homework and breakfast, send them off to school with my niece, come back to the office, work all day. I try to be done by 3, but we're so busy now that it's often till 5. But I am taking one day a week where I try to go and volunteer at each of their schools so that I see what they're doing at the school. But it's not fun. It's a horrible schedule. It's long days, and then you get home and they have soccer or basketball and homework and other things. And instead of just being able to have family time and enjoy one another, it's a lot of work, but we'll get through it.
Well, I think the thing you said that's really critical to our managing this is that we really don't have control. So to do what Christina says and exercise what control we can, but understand that things change. Like where my one grandson goes to school, the entire school went online overnight because their case count was so high. And it's just, and then they're back, and then they're home again. And it has been very disruptive. And we recognize that it's disruptive for us, and our clients are experiencing the same thing. So I'm wondering how adaptable clients have been to this process, and if they're accepting your availability, meetings remotely or in other ways. How are clients adapting?
I guess I have a few comments about that. First of all, I would say many of my clients are in the same boat. So I can think of one client in particular. He's in-house counsel for a company, and every time I talk to him, he has 2 little kids on top of him. They're sort of crawling on him and making noises. His wife is also an attorney, but he seems to have the greater responsibility for childcare. So I would say he's pretty understanding. Now, that being said, clients have the same stressors. They have things they have to get done. They need product turned around. And so that really hasn't changed. So I think it's a lot more acceptable now that when you're in the middle of a Zoom call, that your dog's going to bark and your kid's going to crawl on your lap and your spouse is going to walk by, and, people understand that, but, they still want the work done. So that part's difficult. I think it's a little easier now to be a little more honest about maybe if you have limitations because of what's going on with your family, but in the end, you have to kind of figure it out. And I guess we should all remember too, if we have people that work under us, to also be very understanding of them, because we tend to put a lot of pressure on them. So if you have an assistant, if you have associates who work under you, a lot of our associates are in a much more difficult situation than I, because, my youngest, she just turned 11. She's pretty independent. I have associates who work with me who have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. That's a very different situation. You can't just put them in the other room and tell them, to do their schoolwork and let if there's an IT problem or if they have a question about their math. They have little tiny children. So we all need to be understanding of those who work for us, just like we're wanting our clients to be understanding to us.
I think early on in the pandemic, people were very, very tolerant and were accommodating appointments that couldn't be done in person. We ended up doing on the phone, and then eventually got onto Zoom. And they were very patient about the whole thing and appreciative that you would accommodate them in a difficult time. As time has moved on, I think that's changed a bit. And what I see a lot is that people have become very impatient. And it's never been, I try to accommodate schedules, but I would never have an occasion where someone could call and I say, when would be a good time for you? And they say tomorrow, that would ever make sense. It just would, who can just drop everything tomorrow? But even when I have clients that I've just put out a week or so, because of this pandemic, because of the anxiety, they'll tell my my associates who answer the phone, I could be dead by tomorrow and the sky is falling and I just can't wait for an appointment next week. And so it's a little bit of both. I think some people are a lot more patient. I think a lot of people are less patient. And I think a lot of people have a lot of time on their hands because all of their fun is taken away and many of their social and business obligations are taken away. And they kind of want your attention right away, and they don't realize that your schedule is still quite tight.
So this leads to another question we got from one of our attendees, and it relates kind of to the attorney-client interaction and relationship, and that is, do the spousal, child, random repair guy, dog barking, cat walking across your keyboard, do those interruptions cause the client any stress because now they're exposed to this other person?
Yeah, so luckily, we do have to remember that we're dealing with attorney-client privilege conversations, a lot of the time. So if you're really having a conversation like that, that means I have to leave my office where kids and spouses might wander by, and I need to go to a separate part of the house, or I need to go out in my car, or I need to walk around the block where I'll be by myself. You still need to make sure that those conversations are completely privileged, obviously. Otherwise, if I'm just working on a document on my computer screen, then maybe I can be less concerned about that, but still concerned, because if I'm working on something that's privileged, you still have to be careful. So, there's a little bit of give and take, because if we're working at home, for some of us, there's not this concept of just completely shutting a door and having our separate space, but you do have to make sure that you're protecting the attorney-client privilege.
I try to always do my appointments when I'm actually at my office. Early on, when the first month I was in quarantine and our office was shut, I would close my door and tell my kids stay in the other room and don't make noise. But it wasn't preferable. I try now always to be in my office, whether it's a in-person meeting, a telephone meeting, or a Zoom meeting. Puppy. What I find, though, is that sometimes clients are distracted. It's hard to keep their focus. They're much more attentive if they're right in front of you in your office. And so sometimes they have distractions. But I think my biggest complaint is dealing with other professionals who are not in their office. And you might get them on the golf course, or you might get them in their car, or you might get them wherever they may be. And you're trying to have very serious conversations about very important things. And it's difficult to get them to focus, and they certainly don't have in front of them the paperwork that they need. What I also have found is that when you have meetings like that, people are less prepared. They're kind of winging it, when if it was an in-person meeting or a traditional meeting, they would have been a lot more prepared for the meeting.
Have you noticed if there have been any technology limitations with your clients, that they don't have internet, or they can't do Zoom, or they don't know how to download a document for review? Have you had any of those types of problems? And if so, how do you solve them?
It happens all the time. And so there's some that don't have, I deal with some people who are very old, and they might not have computers at all. And if they do have computers, they don't necessarily have cameras on them. And then if they do have internet, it might not be a speed that really works. And so it's very different. It's easier to talk to someone on the phone than it is to talk to someone on a Zoom, where there's a delay and you're not able to communicate well. So we've gotten creative. I go to people's homes all the time, and if they're not comfortable with having someone in their home, I'm happy to talk to them through a window. I'm happy to talk to them in their garage. I'm happy to meet them on their front porch. Sometimes I've had clients come to my parking lot and not get out of their car, and we just communicate through the car window, wearing masks. So we've had to accommodate for a lot of things. And it's not just technology, it's also people's comfort level of, how close do they really want to be to people who are not in their immediate family?
I would say the technology issues in my case probably go the opposite direction. My clients tend to be businesses, they're pretty sophisticated. I'm not that great with technology, and every time there is a call, it's different. My firm uses WebEx, a lot of people use Zoom, some people use Microsoft Teams. There's something, there's all these different platforms, right? And sometimes these calls are getting set up really quickly. My assistant sets them up. And when I go to have one, I'm not even sure, is it just a dial in? Am I going to be in on a Zoom? Did I wear, am I still in my pajamas? So sometimes I'm just kind of figuring those things out on the fly. So it's usually my technology issues that are a little bit lacking. So I call IT a lot.
What about documents? Are you having to overnight physical documents, or are people able to use the technology to access what you send them?
Most people I can send a digital document to. If it's a sensitive document, it has to be password protected. Sometimes they can't navigate that. And so we do end up doing a lot of things where I go in person, or we are meeting with clients in office, and so some will just say, no, I'll just come to you. But I've been impressed at how well clients, even ones that are quite a bit older, how they're able to at least download a PDF file and be able to follow along with a PDF file on their computer.
Okay. So this is something I would like the two of you to discuss, because you live in different situations. Christina, you're a dual parent household. Doug, you're a single parent household. So I'd like you to talk about how this works differently between the two of those types of households. And then Christina, an additional question for you, and that is, in a dual parent household, is the division of labor equal for each of you?
Do you want me to address it first?
Sure, go ahead, Doug.
Okay. So I'm a single parent, but I do have extended family that is around to help. So I have 3 sisters that all live within 1.5 miles or 2 miles of my home. My mother lives within 1 mile of my home. My dad lives downstairs. I live upstairs. He's 99 and he's doing well, but I have to keep the kids away from him now. And so what I try to do is I try to have me be the one physically present when there are parenting things to be done. Things like driving kids here and there, I do have help with that. And if I have to leave my home, my kids are too young to leave alone. I can leave them alone for a short period of time during the day, but never when it's dark outside. And so in order to get in a workout, in order to get in to the office early, I have to have somebody come to my house while my kids are still asleep and just physically be there. And so fortunately, I have a lot of family that can do that. And then, I have also people that I pay to help out with that. But I try my best, if it's something that a parent really needs to be doing, whether that is eating with them, helping them with homework, helping them with their sports, playing with them. I never go out at night. I always am there for them at night, put them to bed. I try to be there back by the time they wake up in the morning. So if they don't wake up too early, I would have already come back from the gym or come back from the office so that I'm there when they wake up. So I try to be as present as possible, but I have to have outside help. I don't have that second person who is co-parenting.
So our division of labor before the pandemic, I think, was quite fair. I don't cook at all. My husband does all the grocery shopping. He cooks dinner every single night. He cleans up the kitchen. And I had most of the responsibility for sort of, setting up kid play dates, setting up kid education things, and, kind of making sure that goes well, hiring nannies, that kind of stuff. And so even though it was quite fair before, there's probably more on my shoulders now, because the making dinner and cleaning it up is still kind of the same, but the keeping track of kids' school and what they're doing is quite different and harder. And also the normal structure that we had for help is gone. So my mom used to pick up my youngest twice a week after school until I got home from work. And my aunt used to pick her up twice a week. And then we had a nanny who would help us, a little bit in the evenings and weekends as needed. And we just, we're being protective of our parents now. And we see more people than they do, and they're older. And, so they're not doing that. They do see their grandparents a little bit, but not the same as they used to. So we don't have that help anymore. So more of that, I guess, is falling on my shoulders now, even though maybe there was an equal division before. I guess it goes without saying that generally speaking, a lot of this stuff it falls on women's shoulders more. That's not always true, of course. There are certainly men who, have more of that work in a relationship. But I think a lot of women are feeling it more. And that's why I think somebody talked about the recession, or, that this has been harder for mothers in some situations. So, maybe there needs to be some renegotiating. I think if you're in a relationship with a partner and you're trying to figure out what everyone is supposed to be doing, maybe with this situation, and especially how long it's going to last, maybe there has to be some renegotiating of the division of labor. Although I'm never taking on dinner, so I'll have to figure out what I'm willing to take on.
Oh, you're still on mute, Lori.
Yeah, I know. I just noticed that. So this kind of goes to the next question, and that is, Christina, you and your husband are both lawyers. And with that billable hour being an important metric for success and promotion in a law firm setting, and parenting requires additional hours away from work during the pandemic, what impact do you see this having on the careers of attorneys who have to juggle these competing demands? And would it ever be an issue where it's more important for you to have the billable hour versus your husband, or vice versa?
Yeah, sure. Those things ebb and flow. And there are weeks when I'm super busy, and there's work times when he's super busy, and we have to give and take a little bit, right? And we have to figure that out. But I guess stepping back from our own personal situation and sort of the bigger picture, thinking about a lot of our associates right now, it might be that lawyers with really young children are really not going to be able to hit those high numbers during this. And I don't know that law firms have ever done a really good job of addressing that issue overall, how people can have families and, build 2,000 hours a year. It's very, very difficult. And I think it's a time for attorneys to push back a little bit on their employers or their law firms or whatever it is, and go have conversations with them and see what you can figure out in terms of whether it's maybe a short-term accommodation for the pandemic, or maybe it's a more longer-term accommodation. But I see the younger generation, certainly our kids that are in their 20s are really more interested in having a good lifestyle and not interested in working all the time. I think they're going to make a big difference in our profession. But I think everybody needs to be having really open conversations with their employers right now about what's doable. Because if we all go crazy at the end of this, that's not going to do anyone any good. We've got to survive, and with our sanity intact. So we've got to figure this out.
So, Doug, with your associate, do you have any issues about billable hours and hitting some benchmark, or are you okay with the more flexible?
Well, my current associate attorney doesn't have kids, and so doesn't have to take the time off. And we don't. Our practice generally doesn't focus around the billable hours. To the extent we can, we try to do flat fees. But there is an expectation when you're representing a client that you work expeditiously, you get the work done, you get it done in a way that that shows the client that you're invested in them. So money aside, you've got to do the work. If you take on the work, you've got to complete the work. And if you've got to drop everything because your son forgot to take an extra mask and he dropped his in the toilet, and you've got to drive to school and take an extra mask, or They leave their laptop at school and they can't do their homework without having their take-home laptop. So you've got to drop everything and go get that. There's always this push. And so, yes, you do want to make money. If you don't work, you're not going to get paid, but then you also have to meet your clients' expectations. And clients may be patient with rescheduling once in a while, but if you keep rescheduling and put them off, they're not going to be very pleased with the work that you're doing.
So we talked about this a little bit before the meeting started, and that is when I was practicing and I had a big project, I would work from home, but most of the time I would be in the office, and it seems like things have now switched. So how are you handling hearings and depositions when there are kids in the house?
So when I have hearings and depositions, I actually go into the office for the most part. So I work at home most of the time, but if I need the complete quiet, privacy, no risk of anyone walking by, because I have, like last week I had a hearing before a federal magistrate. I just went into the office for a couple of hours, and my office is very quiet. There's hardly anyone in there. I close my door. I have the privacy. I've had depositions for the last couple of days, and same thing, went into the office. Just even though it was a remote deposition, I wanted to have the quiet and the privacy. So yeah, it is completely switched, because in the past I was like you, Lori, if I had something big due and needed some quiet, I would come home and work at home, and no one would be here until kids came home at 3:30 or so. So it is very different.
And I try to do everything at the office. Even my kids are good about staying on task with their schoolwork or playing quietly while I can shut the door. But I have another limitation, and that is I have become so accustomed to my desk with my keyboard and my mouse and my 2 computer screens, and I work really efficiently that way. And I cannot function as well when I'm at home and I have to use the laptop keyboard, or I have to use a different mouse that doesn't respond the same way. And I'm just not adaptable enough. And so if I'm doing hearings and depositions or things like that, I've got to be here in the office. And if I'm doing work where I've got to be engaged and I've got to work quickly, I've got to be in my space that I'm most comfortable with. And I think it's just a product of age. There were laptops when I went to law school, but I really didn't use one the way that younger people would. And I think younger people are just better at adapting to different computers, different keyboards, and different systems. But so I'm just more comfortable being in my own office.
Okay, so I think we would all agree that practicing law is stressful. It's a profession that has some ingrained stresses in it. You add a pandemic on top of that, that's another stressor. Who can we be around? What can we do? What are our limitations? And then you add parenting on top of that, it adds another layer of stress that didn't exist before. And so what are the stresses with sending your kids to school? Is it worrying about what they're going to be exposed to versus if you kept them home? Do you worry about what they're missing from their school attendance? And do you have contingency plans in case school closed or in case they've been exposed, Doug, as with your children? And how are all those stresses playing into the existing stress of just practicing law?
I guess one thing I think is really important to mention, because I saw this on TV the other day, is that kids are really stressed out about the pandemic. We sort of think that they're not, that they don't know that much about. I mean, they know some about it, obviously, but I think we forget that everything we say, they're sort of listening to. So my husband and I are news junkies, and we're talking about these things all the time, and it seeps into their little minds, and that they start getting stressed out. So it's really important to make them feel safe and know that we have we have plans, we're taking care of things. Yeah, this isn't a perfect situation and there's risk, but your parents are taking care of things, that we're doing the best we can. They shouldn't be scared. We can't make it scarier for them than it needs to be. And I'm not too scared about school. I feel like my school has good plans. I feel safe and confident with that. Now, that being said, none of those things are perfect. And, at any moment, they may be coming home. We have a child who's going to NYU. It could be like last spring where we're going cross country to bring a kid home. We don't know when her school year is going to end. We have a student at the U who's pretty much, not classes aren't that in person, but, it's all just sort of unpredictable. So a lot of flexibility, just being ready to, at a moment's notice, just be at home all the time. I just think that's the reality right now.
I think my kids are not as scared about getting COVID simply because I had it and my symptoms were mild. I do have, as an ongoing issue, I don't have my smell back. So I completely lost taste and smell. And then my smell came back a tiny bit, but now it's been replaced with really horrible smells. So things that are supposed to smell good, like garlic and onions and tomato plants and basil, they smell really putrid. And so I'm kind of dealing with that. But my kids are not, I think, that scared about getting it, but they hate COVID because it kills all their fun. They can't do the play dates they used to do. They can't go to the places they used to go. We used to travel a lot and fly on an airplane to different places. And we did one trip in January, and we haven't done a plane trip, since January. And for that, they may seem unusual for a lot of people, but my kids, we probably were flying once a month somewhere. And so it's a big hole in their entertainment. So I think more than anything, they just, they'll say COVID is horrible, COVID sucks. But it really is because they got to wear a mask when they don't want to, and they've got to not do things that used to be fun. And so it's more of an inconvenience, but I don't think it's a fear factor for them.
So I would like you guys to opine on what changes you think will last beyond the current situation in the way you practice law and the way law firms and businesses now handle their employees. What will last and what will go away, in your opinion?
So I think the Zoom meetings have worked better than people expect. And I was so nervous for my first Zoom deposition in the sense that I just thought I couldn't effectively take a deposition via Zoom. And certainly it's not as good as being in person, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. I think the Zoom hearings are actually quite good. In some ways, you kind of get to see the judge better and they get to see you better. So I think a lot of those things I think some level of that is going to stay in place. I think in the future, we're going to be more willing to do video, depositions via Zoom instead of traveling and going to the expense of doing a deposition that way. I think more hearings will be held remotely. I think more client conferences. It used to be if they didn't come into your office, you just talked to them on the telephone. I never did this. And this has become quite comfortable. So I think a lot of that will stay. I also think that a lot of law firms that are downtown Salt Lake, like we are, might be rethinking that. Like, do we need to have a big office downtown? Does anyone even come downtown anymore? Is that even a thing? And do we need expensive office space? Do we all need offices all the time? I think a lot of people are going to start thinking, like half the time in the office for camaraderie and half the time not. Especially if you have a commute. Lawyers who have any sort of serious commute, it's a blessing to not have to get in that car for 30 or 40 minutes to get to your job. And that increases your family time if you can avoid that. So, I think some of these changes are going to stick.
I think the Zoom call has been convenient. I don't think it will replace the in-person meeting entirely, but it is a lot simpler to get on a Zoom call exactly when you're supposed to. So no one's late, no one's early, you have a starting time. And then you can finish earlier. If it's an in-person meeting, right now with the pandemic, we Clorox between every client. It takes time to get ready for them. Then when they come, there's a lot of chitty-chatting, and a meeting that should be 15 minutes, can't possibly be shorter than a half an hour, 45 minutes, but a Zoom call can sometimes be very efficient. So I think the Zoom call will continue. I don't think it'll replace the in-person meeting for me. I hope we don't go completely remote, because I just don't think the communication is as good, and people are constantly distracted, and I don't think they're 100% engaged. And sometimes you're talking about very important things and you need 100% of their attention. And sometimes things that you're going through with them are very, very difficult, and you have to have color charts and you have to show them, be able to point to something. And that just is difficult to do on a Zoom call. So I hope that we don't all become at-home workers, solely communicating through video and texting the way that our children do. Hopefully we'll be in person.
So when you talk about efficiency and having to get things done, how is it working with your staff interaction? I know when I was practicing, there was a lot of just sort of yelling out my door to get my assistant to come in and help me. And since I moved up to the U, I don't do that anymore. I'm a lot quieter. But now I'm wondering about staff interaction and the exchange of instructions. And if you're handling that by phone, by Zoom, how are you handling your staff working?
So even before, I guess I was sending a lot of emails, so that hasn't changed that much. But of course you would see people, especially my assistant. I would walk out all day and chat with her, and that, I really miss that. For a while, we were having morning Zoom calls. We have let that go a little bit, and we need to get back to that. So my assistant and I, every morning at 9 o'clock, had a set Zoom call. And we would it was a nice way to connect, see how each other's doing. We would go over my schedule for the day, make sure we each knew what sort of our priorities were. This would just be 15, 20 minutes. And so at least I was seeing her every day, because it is kind of weird when you have this completely email relationship, just because it gets busy, right? And same things with associates and paralegals and other people I'm working with. I try to set up a Zoom with them every once in a while, at least, so that we're having a somewhat real interaction, and it's not just completely by email, because I think a lot of things get lost that way, and you forget that there's another human being on the other side. So I think that's a good thing to incorporate if you can. It's just because they're not necessary sometimes. I mean, you can do it all by email sometimes, but I think just setting that up just so you have that personal connection is important.
And I think with our office, most of the time, the communication is between two people. And so one person will go to the other person's door. We aren't going inside offices. We're kind of standing at the door, and we're trying to stay, 6 feet away from people. I hope that it doesn't turn into more email, because I already have so many emails on a daily basis. It's hard to track everything. So communicating with your own staff by email would just add to that. So we're spread out enough that we're able to do that, and we're all in one building. Everybody's coming to work right now, so we're able to communicate sort of the same way we were before. We just try to stay away from each other, not touch each other's pens, not touch each other's keyboards, not touch each other's phones, and those things.
But again, it does add this other level of hyper consciousness. You can't touch a doorknob, or you can't do this, and I think
that's everywhere we go now. I mean,
right.
When people are 4 feet within your reach of you, you start to panic because you're so used to them being farther away. So it's a different world we're in, and heaven forbid someone would try to hug somebody.
Well, I want to thank you both for this. It's been very interesting and enlightening. And I think the primary message is we all just need to understand and be considerate. And we need to understand our clients are going through exactly the same things we're going through. They have parenting issues. Possibly they have other types of issues, that this is all causing the same stresses for everyone. And if we're cognizant of them and of our staff and the issues that they're experiencing, we really can get through this and maintain a viable law practice. Would you agree with that?
I guess we'll see in a couple of years. I think that's true, but I think it's also important to recognize that there might have to be substantial changes for some people. That, some people might not be able to get through this without really having some accommodation to their schedule or some, it depends on what the person's circumstances, whether they have their own health issues, if they have parenting issues, if they're taking care of elderly parents. I guess I would just say to everyone, all we have to do right now is be good enough. We're not all going to be probably our very best during this time. We're not going to be the best parents in the whole world. Maybe we won't be the best lawyers in the whole world. Cut yourself a little break. Do the best you can, but give everyone some slack.
I don't know that we have any choice but to accommodate and try to do our best and just struggle through it. We're fortunate that the kind of industry that we're in, we can switch to a telephone call or to a Zoom meeting. Anybody in travel, leisure, or entertainment, this is a horrible, horrible time with no end in sight. And so if you had your sights set on a certain type of career, unfortunately, you may have to change your sights onto something completely different. And there may be areas of the law that it's the same thing. There may be areas of practice where practice is kind of dried up. But from what I've heard from divorce attorneys is they're booming. Estate planning attorneys, people are nervous and calling quite often. But I imagine there's some areas of the law that have had kind of a lull. And I have empathy. I hope that people who aren't able to keep enough work to support their families are able to find another area of the law or find another niche. Because as optimistic as some people are that there's an end in sight with this pandemic, I'm not as optimistic. And even if they do come up with a vaccine, I don't know to what extent I trust what government officials tell us. I'm not an anti-vaccine person. I got my flu shot this year, but if it's in the realm of experimenting, I'm not experimenting with my kids, and I don't want to experiment with my health. And I imagine I'm not alone with that. So even if you do get a vaccine, how soon will it be before it's widespread and we really get this under control? So this just might be what we need to do for the near future. And what I'm hoping with kids is that they take an approach where they look more long-term, because it's really kind of been putting out the fires as you go. The kids were home all summer, but teachers were not working because they don't pay them to work in the summer. So all summer long, there might have been administrators putting together certain things, but the teachers weren't planning for it. And then teachers show up to school the second week of August and they're told, you're staying home half the time, work it out. They don't have a plan. And it just feels like we constantly are reacting rather than being proactive. And I don't have a solution to it. I just identify the problem.
Well, thank you both very much. I really appreciate it. And I know all of the people attending really appreciate it. Your comments have been thoughtful and they've been helpful and useful. And so thank you very much. And I hope to see everyone again at a future webinar. Thanks.
Thank you.